start off by talking about something that's on a lot of people's mind. So, a few months ago, you became the head of the public service, the clerk to the Privy Council, and the secretary to the cabinet. How are you? Like, how are you doing?
You don't look well.
No, you look very well. But it's one of those things where you inherit these positions, and no one takes the time to ask, how are you as a human being?
Well, that's very kind, Serge. It's a fascinating time to be doing this job. I am struck by the novelty of a lot of the situations that we collectively are confronting, and I as a person am confronting. It's a complicated governing environment. The geopolitics are complicated. The technological context is complicated. The effects of climate are having effects on all of us. I mean, these are all things that kind of make the work of government challenging, but extraordinarily relevant. And so as an individual, I am feeling the effects of all of those things coming through a variety of different files that come across my desk. But I'm really struck by how important it is, the work that we do together. I think, the sorts of challenges that we're facing are ones that government plays a particularly important role in. Whether you're trying to figure out how to manage the geopolitics, you're trying to figure out how to manage climate, how you're going to deal with some of the technological changes that are facing us. And those are all kind of affirming things, because we should all recognize that the work we are doing makes a big difference on matters that make a big difference to the country. So there's that. And I think at the same time, I am very conscious of the fact that all of these challenges, and we can begin to list them more specifically, are kind of coming simultaneously. The term that's getting used is polycrisis. And that's challenging for all of us as individuals, and it's challenging for the institution as well, to try and figure out how we kind of manage against a background where there are multiple demands on us, and each of the demands is really, really important. So how do you kind of figure out what needs to be at the top of the pile? How do we figure out how we kind of do these things in a way that's sustainable for us as individuals? Those are challenges that I think all of us face, me included.
Perfect. I can only imagine, probably you more so than others.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it's the kind of job where you could literally work 24 hours a day, and there'll still be more to do. And one of the questions, I guess, that people wanted to know is, what does John Hannaford, the man, do to relax as a hobby or outside of work?
Well, I think drawing the lines around work is important. And as you say, I mean, and that is not specific to my job. I think all of us have so many demands on us over the course of a day that you do have to be kind of conscious of trying to figure out how you can do that in a way that sustains you and builds resilience. I mean, for me, I've got I'm a keen reader. I love my cottage dearly, so going there is kind of one of my bits of refuge. I like to cook. I used to say I'm a keen dog person as well, and I used to have a couple dogs who, unfortunately, the elder one just passed away a few weeks ago. But we'll be getting dogs soon, so that'll be another thing to keep me occupied.
Okay, perfect. And I love dogs. And I don't know why people. I don't like cats, but I like dogs.
Well, you know what? I didn't either, but my youngest now has a cat, and so I'm sort of a cat grandparent, and and I've grown very fond of cats.
My daughter keeps threatening me she will get a cat when she's older, but anyways, we'll see. Hopefully not. One thing that I wanted to touch on as well, and it's quite timely. So you recently launched a new values and ethics exercise. And when you launched it, I heard from a number of people, and they all had the same reaction. They all said, wow, like this is timely, and why didn't I think about that? And I answered them. I answered them all the same way. I said, "Well, this is why you're not clerk." Uh, but with that being said, and you've indicated that the public service values and ethics serve as an important compass to guide our action and behavior. And you alluded before of evolving, changing times, and the fact that we're dealing with holy crisis, and the world is a lot more complicated than it used to be. Could you share with us your thoughts on the evolving nature of the public service values and ethic in the current context of uncertainty, change, and frankly, just holy crisis, multiple crises at the same time?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think the idea of the exercise that Catherine Blewett and colleagues are leading is to reflect on that governing environment through the lens of the Code of Values and Ethics. The intention is not to be reinventing the code, because I think actually the work that was done by John Tate a couple decades ago now continues to be remarkably relevant as a set of principles. And that it's relevant not only because it, I think, identifies kind of the parameters of what it is to be a public servant and the sort of expectations of what it is to be a public servant, but it does it in terms that are of general enough application that they're relevant in a number of different contexts. And I think the conversation that I've asked Catherine to lead is to bring that then to the context that we're operating in now, because the time that John was working, there were just different sorts of preoccupations than the ones we face now. And I would say, I honestly think we are in a more complicated space than we were, and for all the reasons that we were just discussing. And I think when we have, and the other piece of this, we talked about sort of the breadth of the challenges that we're facing. The other piece of this is the pace of change, and because that is just a reality too. We are constantly being confronted with new, sometimes surprising, sometimes really disturbing sets of facts that we are trying to manage. And I think, just from my own experience, in situations where there is a lot of activity, knowing what you're trying to achieve is actually a pretty critical piece. And values and ethics code you can see as sort of a set of rules, but you can also see it as a set of objectives, because they really are strategic objectives that are being identified, whether it's defending democracy or sound stewardship of public resources or excellence or, integrity. Those are all things that are also, we should be having as our strategic outcomes. And so when we're thinking about a really complicated geopolitical world, or we're thinking about the effects of climate, that making sure that you know what you're trying to achieve amongst the noise is actually kind of essential. So that's kind of the broad purpose. But the other piece of it is, we're a big organization now. I have been using 350. I'm told now it's 375,000 members of the public service. We are by far the largest institution in the country, and a lot of folks joined in the last 5 years. And that context is just different than when you and I started our careers. And I think people who have been working in that reality started in their basements, started their kitchen tables, and it's very different than when you start going into an office every day and you just by osmosis begin to pick up the kind of values of the institution that you're serving in. It's nature of kind of human relations. And so I think we need to be a little more mindful now as leaders, in my context, but as a community generally, as to what the kind of community values are, and to reinforce that and have an opportunity to kind of talk about them and talk about how they should be applied in given situations. And so what I'm hoping will happen is that each part of the public service will have a more specific conversation then about how the values and ethics apply to the sorts of challenges that they are facing. Because what you are seeing when you're operating in DFO as a fisheries patrol officer may be very different than what you're seeing if you're a consular officer in Peru. But the same set of rules actually do apply in all those instances, but just thinking about how they apply and what the kind of challenges are that people are facing, and thinking about those through the context of a values and ethics analysis, I think is really, really important. And I think it is timely now, because the challenges are new.
And I totally agree. And I think you layer on the social media aspect of it too.
100%.
and it starts becoming a lot more complicated, and a refresh being needed as well. So totally agree. And you did mention the pace of change. And back when I started, we used to take 2 years to develop the perfect policy. And what I've noticed is that nowadays, if you take 2 years to develop anything, by the time you launch it, frankly, all your assumptions are wrong. The world has moved on. There's been a new technology. There's been a new geopolitical crisis. Things have completely changed. Now, against that backdrop, and the fact that Canada's changing, the world is shrinking, the pace of change is coming, and it won't get any slower. I think it'll likely just become more and more rapid. How do you anticipate, or what are some of your advice on the policy people on how to navigate that new reality, that new role? And what are some of the emerging themes and priorities that you see for you that you'd like to share with the group here?
Yeah, look, I mean, I covered some of that to some degree in my earlier comments, and I think what I'd add on to it is I think we need to have a pretty clear sense as to how we prioritize, because that is just part of the exercise. We can't do everything all at once. So how are you sorting through the kinds of challenges that are facing you and making sure that you're paying attention to the most critical things and managing those that are not necessarily at the top of the pile. But the other piece of it, and so two other pieces of it. The second is, I think we need to be flexible, and that's maybe related to the first piece. Like, we need to be able to adjust to circumstances as they arise and not be thrown off if things do not follow precisely the plan that we thought. And I must say, you asked me at the beginning, sort of how I'm doing. That's one thing I have taken from my current job is I am surprised every day by how the day unfolds, literally every day. And that's just, I think, a feature of the environment in which we're in. It's partially a feature of the job, but I think it is also the world keeps surprising us. And so how do you respond when the world does keep surprising us, and doing so in a way that is consistent with sort of what is most important? And I do fall back then to those strategic purposes that we're trying to achieve. Those should give us some guidance as to what is most important, because they give you a sense as to what it is that collectively the government expects of us, the country expects of us. The other piece of it, though, I think, is to approach things with some empathy, because, like, we operate in an environment where there's lots of anxiety. Yep. And, you know, we may feel it ourselves. I certainly do, fairly frequently. Others are feeling it. The communities are feeling it. We need to be mindful of that. There's a human element to all that we do that needs to be kind of front and center in how we do the jobs that we're being asked to do. And I think that's pretty critically important as well, as we think about how we carry out our functions. So.
And I couldn't agree more on a human aspect, which leads me to my next question. So Canada's changing from a demographic perspective, and so is our public service. And I know there's efforts to remove systematic barriers to recruitment and career path. And a lot of the folks here are from diverse community, and they'd like to hear from you. So the Clerk's call to action, you've committed to continuing the Clerk's call to action. So that was very, very well received. So thank you for that. And they also want to hear from you. What else and how else could senior leaders help folks who are typically from a marginalized community who want to join in and contribute more to the public service?
So I see that as an intimate part of the conversation we're having around values and ethics, because I think the people values, well, there's two aspects of it. The people values are absolutely values of inclusion, and how we bring out the best in our teams and how we maximize the effect of the public service generally. And to me, that is making sure that we are reflective of the communities we're serving and best able to then respond to the demands that should be placed on us as a public service. And for the people who are within this organization, they are best able to contribute. And so those are all questions of inclusion to me. And then, so the call to action is, as I say, an intimate part of the project that we have underway with respect to values and ethics. But I think there's also a question of excellence. We want the best of what we can provide, and I would say that I have seen personally from the kind of increasing diversity of the deputy minister community, the value of that as a way of understanding and responding to challenges that we are facing, and to doing so in a way that is far more insightful than if we had a bunch of folks from a single background who were sitting around that table. So the question of inclusion, I think, comes up in a number of different ways, but it's one of my real priorities, and this actually transcends this job. This is something where I think the call to action that was issued by my friend Ian Shugart a number of years ago was of seminal importance to the health of us as a public service. And Janice reinforced it, and it is now my call to action.
And we thank you for that. And indeed, it's a true legacy from Ian Shugart, and may he rest in peace as well. Similar topic. So reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is a priority for the government. And the work being done related to reconciliation and the implementation of UNDA is an interesting example of adaptive policy making. And I guess the question I had for you is, looking ahead to long-term reconciliation goals, which practices should we uphold and which should we continue? And it's something to kind of explore, but we'll focus on the reconciliation, but frankly, it's something that could apply to a lot of other policies.
Oui, à mon avis, c'est vraiment une question d'apprentissage d'une certaine part. C'est un aspect de notre travail où l'innovation est centrale, évidemment. Mais la question de co-développement, la question de vraie réconciliation, ça c'est un processus. C'est une conversation entre les fonctionnaires et les communautés qui sont pertinents dans les différents contextes. Et c'est vraiment excitant, je dirais, parce que c'est une occasion pour nous d'être plus souple dans les moyens de travail, dans les contextes de notre travail. Et pour cette raison, je dirais, c'est une question d'innovation profonde pour la santé de notre pays, pour la santé de notre communauté. So look, I think this is an incredibly exciting area of development, and I think it's one of these areas where there is, we are going to continue to learn. We're going to continue to see innovation, and we're going to continue to see different ways of developing policy in the contexts where we are living up to UNDA. We are living up to the sort of broader expectations and the real possibilities of reconciliation. And I from my previous job at Enercan, I saw this intimately, and it was one of the most exciting aspects of the job that we had there, was thinking about how the country can look as a result of some of the assets that exist here, and how we can be working with communities who are most directly kind of implicated with respect to those resources in a way that is advancing their well-being, and I think ultimately we make a better society.
And I agree, and I've seen it too, working with NRCan in the energy transition, and how involving Indigenous communities from the start helps push the reconciliation agenda forward, but also the economic agenda as well. One other question, and this one's about the future. So a lot of the folks here are much younger than I am, and they have the future ahead of them, and they are thinking, what are the skills and competencies I should be developing, and what should I try to get as experience as I progress through my career? Any insight or any piece of advice you could provide to folks here, just based on your career experience? And I think everyone's here has the objective of being clerk one day.
I didn't have that objective. I guess a couple things. First of all, it's a team sport, what we do. So working well within the context of the team is kind of a critical skill, and knowing how to lead within that context and realizing that it's not about us as individuals as much as it is about how we figure out collectively how we can get things done and provide the best advice that we are capable of collectively and actually achieving things. That's kind of a fundamental aspect of the work that we do. But you're thinking about my own career path. The thing I guess I have always been very skeptical of is a really detailed career plan, because I just feel like there are way too many contingencies that we can send you off in different directions. And if you're too fixated on the next set of jobs that you absolutely must do in order to feel that you're going to be a success, I think the chances of being disappointed are pretty high. And I think you miss opportunities that could be fantastic. And so the thing I've always encouraged my own children and anyone who asks me to do is to think as laterally as possible. Be as open as possible to the opportunities that are presenting themselves to you. And in many instances, my own experience has been is the people you work with who are more important than the things you do. The things you do matter, for sure. But a poisonous atmosphere will destroy whatever fascinating file you were trying to confront, whereas pretty difficult things can be managed by effective teams, and you can have very positive memories of those experiences. And so I have usually tried to privilege the people I work with over the file and to be as flexible as possible in thinking through what I want to achieve. And all that said, I mean, I go back to some of the points I raised earlier. I think, trying to lead empathetically matters a lot. I think trying to be as innovative and as flexible as it can be in approaching the challenges that are in front of us matters a lot, particularly right now, because I think we are coming up against some pretty novel challenges. And if we are stuck just in doing what we've always done, we probably won't solve those problems. So figuring out how we do things in a new way, figuring out how we manage the risks that are in front of us, acknowledging that this is hard, and being innovative and collaborative, I think that gives us the best shot we have.
And I could not agree more. And I'd like to ask Pablo, any questions from the audience? Come up on the screen. Okay, here, one question, I'll pick one. Where do you see the public service in 10 years?
I think that we are going to continue to see the kinds of trends that we see right now. We started by talking about some of these big challenges that form the context in which we operate. I don't think we are going to see sort of a fundamental improvement in the geopolitical situation in the next 10 years. I think that's going to continue to be part of our operating environment. I think we are going to continue to see pretty significant technological change that's going to continue to kind of create new challenges for us as we move forward. And I think the effects of climate are going to continue to be real effects. And I think, those are all things that will continue to shape us. I think it's really hard to know precisely how. And so that gets you then into how do you build organizations that are resilient? Because we know there's going to be challenges, we know there are going to be changes, we don't know precisely what that means. So I think in that context, again, I kind of fall back on what are our strategic objectives, because I think that's got to then inform how we carry out the tasks that are in front of us. And I think we have to approach this with a sense of flexibility and innovation, because again, that's the nature of we're not going to solve things if we are rigid and are simply trying to approach things precisely the way we have always done. It's just not going to solve the problem. So I think in that context, I think the next 10 years are going to be, I'm sure we will see trends that will continue, but I think we are going to have to adjust, and we're going to have to adjust in some instances pretty quickly to those challenges as they arise. And the thing that gives me enormous confidence is our recent experience. I think we don't want in many ways want to sort of cast our minds back to the last several years, but living through that pandemic was an extraordinary trial, and I think we are still all feeling the effects of that, and I think those effects are going to continue. But what we should absolutely embrace is the extraordinary innovation that public servants demonstrated over an extraordinarily short period of time. And that's something, I'm not sure if we were asked on the eve of the pandemic if we thought we could all sort of transition as quickly as we did to a very new way of working, if we would say, yeah, that was going to happen. But it did. And I think it's something that we just need to recognize, that we are capable of change. We are capable of doing things in new ways. This is a very different institution than when I joined 27 years ago, 28 years ago. We've changed just by virtue of, cultural changes in our society, changes in the way that we expect our leaders to behave. There's a series of things that have driven pretty fundamental change in this institution. And I think we, again, need to embrace that. And we need to expect as much of ourselves as we possibly can. One of the values is excellence. And that we need to be mindful of that, because Canadians deserve it. They deserve the best that we can bring.
Yeah. And I always tell folks, excellence starts with you.
100%.
100%. And then the barriers are set and your team will follow. Mm-hmm. I think we have time for potentially a couple of other questions. Here, how do we as policy and analysts encourage senior management to look at the innovative approaches you speak of, particularly in the risk-adverse environment?
Well, we have conversations like this. We are in a risk-averse environment. That is just true, and it is challenging to be a public servant. I think if you are making decisions that are of consequence, then there are downside risks to the work that you're doing. That's just true. By the same token, for all the reasons that we've been discussing, we're in a world where we do need to respond in a timely way to the challenges that we face. And inaction has its consequences too. And so figuring out how you kind of navigate within that is kind of our job. And it's hard. And I think we need to kind of acknowledge that. But by the same token, I think the skill of a public servant, and what becomes sort of a feature of people as they become more senior in the organization, is you figure out how you navigate within a risk environment in a way that gets stuff done. And that will require different skills in different jobs and at different times. But part of it is knowing where the risks are and how you manage those risks. And that is, and risk can mean any number of different things. We should be, part of any mature risk management is that you have a pretty keen sense as to what the downsides are of the work that you're doing. So it's not just kind of blindly tripping into new circumstances. It is mindfully thinking about what the environment is you're operating in, thinking about what can go wrong, and thinking about how you're going to manage that. And then thinking what the best advice is in that context. And that's a pretty critical piece of the work that we do. And I'd say beyond that, I think every member of the public service should feel empowered to be thinking about how they do their work. And I have said this in a number of different contexts, but all of us who are in management should be very open to the views of people who are doing the jobs as to whether there's a better way of doing this. Because ultimately, it's the people who are actually doing the functions who have the most sense as to what's working, what isn't working. And we should be very open to having these conversations, and people should feel empowered to be innovative. Now, this needs to be about mature risk management. There are decisions that need to be made by more senior people in many instances, but there should be a conversation about innovation and about efficiency within our workplaces, about the way that we do the jobs as well. Because again, we're trying to create resilient workplaces. We're trying to create situations where people can actually get their jobs done in a way that allows them to get up the next morning and do it again.
Yep. And I think you're totally right. The other thing I think a lot of people fail to realize, so risk is a spectrum, and not taking a risk could be a risk, and,
100%.
and not taking a decision in itself is a decision. So just being clear-minded and knowing exactly what the pros and cons are to be able to then have mitigation strategy or against those risks is definitely the way to go. I think we have time for probably one more question here. Comment peut-on convaincre les talents du Canada de se joindre à la fonction publique et faciliter les échanges entre le gouvernement et les autres?
Ça, c'est une question importante parce que nous sommes une communauté, mais c'est absolument essentiel d'avoir le sagesse et les perspectives d'un pays en général, je dirais. Et c'est une question de recrutement et c'est une question de conversation. Et pour moi, on doit avoir un sentiment d'ouverture en ce qui concerne notre travail parce que nous sommes, évidemment, il y a un niveau d'expertise qui est profond au sein du gouvernement, mais ce n'est pas la seule source de sagesse dans notre pays, dans notre communauté. Il y a une gamme d'autres acteurs qui sont experts dans une gamme d'autres domaines. Et pour cette raison, l'échange entre les membres du gouvernement, l'échange pratique dans le sens d'un executive exchange, ça c'est une occasion pour partager les niveaux d'expertise entre les différents secteurs. Et c'est quelque chose absolument essentiel pour moi, à mon avis. Et prendre l'exemple de intelligence artificielle, parce que ça c'est évidemment, il y a un niveau d'expertise au sein de la fonction publique en ce qui concerne ce domaine. Mais en même temps, il y a une communauté profonde ici en Canada qui est disponible pour nous, pour les échanges d'idées et les échanges pratiques entre nos organisations. Et ça, c'est pour moi, ça c'est une occasion.
Et d'habitude, il y a quelqu'un. One more? Okay, perfect. Usually I have the person here with the hand up. Tell me 10, 9, 8, 7, but that's fine. Can you share a highlight of your career or moment of pride as a public servant?
This is going to sound slightly corny, but as I am doing my current job, I find I am extraordinarily proud of being a public servant. So I'm 6 months in. I am honestly deeply proud of the work that we do together. And yeah, it's challenging. And yeah, there are things that are going to come up that are going to sort of set us off our mark. But I think the quality of the work that is done in this government is extraordinary. And we should be really, really proud of that. One of the features of our country that I hear, taking the opportunity to go and talk to people outside of government relatively frequently, and it's not always the case that you hear a lot of praise of the public service. But I would say that when anyone sort of thinks about the assets that we have as a country, public service is actually one of the central assets of this society. And you do not need to look very far to sort of think about where there are challenges where you don't necessarily have the same kind of institutional structure that we have. We are able to have a peaceful transition of power, for instance, between governments, which is not something that we should take for granted. That is an incredibly powerful thing. We are able to provide expert advice to no matter what stripe of government. And that is part of our constitutional structure. It is the good government of peace, order, and good government. And we're that. And we should be proud of it. And I think it's again, the conversation that we've launched with respect to the Values and Ethics Code is considerably about us reminding ourselves of the importance of the work we do. And so I honestly have felt enormous pride in this institution as I've had an opportunity to lead it.
Perfect. And we're hoping to continue supporting you in your journey, Mr. Clerk. or John?
John.
John. And with that being said, I just want to take a moment to thank you on behalf of all of us for taking the time to be here with us. You're a very, very busy man, and taking an hour of your time here to share some wisdom, it's definitely appreciated. I have a lot of that I took away from this, and I hope folks have a lot that they took away from this. And I do want to leave you with the last word.
No, look, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for being here and everyone online. I think this kind of forum is so important. And I think, it's interesting in some ways. We think about sort of innovation. Well, this is a forum that's actually remarkably innovative. And even the manner in which we're having these meetings is nice to have these kind of hybrid conversations. And I think this is great. Exactly this kind of exchanges that we should be encouraging. So thanks to you, Serge, and thanks for the organizers of the session. I think it's fantastic.